see you just back from Darwin. You've been doing some transactions in Darwin.
Yeah, I have.
You fly around a bit, don't you?
Yeah, all over the country.
Okay. So you're doing some helping with the presentations there. You were called on because you're a pretty clever fella. And how many properties were sold in that day that you were up there with that team?
8 over 2 days.
Okay, 2 days, so eight transactions. And how many of those were yours?
We got 4 of them.
4 of them, okay. So, and a rough average price of those transactions?
3 of them were for 30, yeah, about 440,000 average.
Okay, so there's something in the order of just a bit under $5 million worth of transactions purchased in a day or two. So it's pretty amazing. So there's a real estate market, and that's Darwin, right? So these are people who, and what sort of people are these clients? Where do they come from?
They're homeowners with equity into their house.
Okay.
So they're using the equity into their house to then go and create some funding opportunities to buy an investment property.
Okay.
They're generally people who need to write off some tax.
Got some tax issues, so they're using a redraw facility on their property, and they're using that money which they've drawn on the property as a deposit for a secondary property.
That's right.
Yeah, and most of these properties are negatively geared, and they're in that kind of 350 to sort of 450 range.
Yes.
Okay, cool. It's exciting.
That is.
Now, one of the questions that Russell's got is around the, where these, if you like, marketeers come from and how they work. And we'll get onto all that. But let's welcome Russell on board here and get into this question straight away. Can you hear us, Russell?
Absolutely, Roy.
Good. How is which state are you in at this point?
I've returned to Melbourne after spending most of the week in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah, feeling pretty good.
Good. Now, Russell, we've got the man of the moment for you to actually speak to. So that's really good, because Russell asked, is it possible for Kate to come in? And Kate he's got his own business, and he's only just around the corner from our office. It probably takes him about 10 minutes or 15 minutes. He's got a fantastic office, great big, it's the Bullet or something, isn't it?
Yeah, the Rocket.
The Rocket, that's what it is. It's a big multi-storey. He's got this fantastic view, and of course, typical Cade. It's all there. The gym's just nearby. He's got the coffee shop downstairs. Plenty of pretty women all around the place, and it's a good life. And Kate, just for those people listening in here, what's your normal day? You're pretty into fitness and into health and well-being.
Yeah, fitness and health is probably my main priority. I put it first, because otherwise it doesn't get done.
Right.
I get up in the morning and I exercise every morning, being weekday mornings at least.
Yeah.
Either walk the dog, do a cardiovascular exercising regime with running or something along those lines. Yeah.
Right. And how long do you do that for, roughly? Is that like half an hour, 40 minutes?
Depending on the intensity of it.
Yeah.
Half an hour if it's intense, and 45 to an hour if it's not.
Okay. Depends how fast the dog can run.
That's right.
What sort of dog you got? What's your dog's name?
Sanchez.
Sanchez.
He's a French bulldog.
Okay, French bulldog. How fast can the Sanchez run? Is he a fast runner?
Actually, he's faster than me.
Faster than you. Okay. Now, how many times a week do you do that?
Well, 5 mornings a week. 5
mornings a week. So you Monday, Tuesday, right through to Friday.
Yeah, religiously.
Religiously. Okay. Now, I understand you have a meeting with your partner about 7:30 in the morning as well.
That's
your
right.
Business partner.
Yeah, no, we meet every morning at 7 a.m.
7 a.m. Okay. So it's an interesting thing. So you're up, you've done your exercise, and you have your business partner meeting 7 a.m. What time do you finish that?
Oh, it's a 10 to 30 minute meeting depending on the
What's
agenda.
going on? Perfect. So with some people sort of getting up, you've actually done part of your day.
Yeah, I'm in the 5 a.m. club.
Okay. Good. So that's the time you get up about 5.
5 to 5:30.
Yep. Cool. And then you're off and running. And if I could jump ahead, one of the questions that Russell asked was, how this whole thing works, and how do you do your properties, in terms of, how did you get started, and how do you get these people to do things? In fact, I'm going to read some of these questions to you. But let's just begin firstly with the current state of the nation on this particular transaction. This is one of a number that you've done, and I'm very familiar with it because you've done it with me. And for those just listening in for the first time, this was a transaction that Cade found an RTA site which is next to the M1. It's affected by road noise, of course, and airport noise. And they're quite large blocks, over 750 square metres one and 1100 plus on another block. They're listed at about $180 each. The blocks were able to be purchased for roughly originally they were 100,000. UK knocked them down to 95 each. So basically, the profit was in that purchase, which is the traditional thing we love to see. In other words, a very safe and secure transaction when you buy that cheaply, because your risk equation is very low. You then got some builders to quote you on the construction, and your feasibility has a 4-bedroom double garage house on one that'll sell for a little under 400, or let's just say 400,000. The other one about 420.
Yes.
You didn't want to use any very money, so you bring in a money partner. The money partner, as it turns out, roughly uses about 107,000, which is the money for the land settlement plus stamp duty and some legals, etc. And then, so they settle the land, and the settlement of this land happens on the 16th of next month. So you entered into an option agreement firstly, then you entered into a conditional contract,
Yes.
then you entered into a non-conditional contract, and bought about 60 days for settlement, which gave you enough time to get your money partners involved and gave you enough time to also start to pre-sell.
That's right, and by taking steps, you can get the result you want rather than trying to throw it all in one big hit.
Correct.
So,
Now, just jumping ahead here, you've been pretty amazing, because I know that you've sold one of these properties already. And what did you sell that one to? And let's just talk briefly without the name of the person and all the rest. What did you sell that property for?
we sold the property for $180,000.
Okay, that's the land component. So
That's
there's
the
the
land
profit. You've made 95,000 before it's even begun, less costs and stuff.
That's right. This one, there's no profits in the build or anything. It was a different system to we originally thought would be the exit strategy for the block. Through local network of real estate agents, I was able to find a buyer who just purchased the block as a straight and typical real estate transaction. I'll be assisting them with building a property, but it's not factored into the equation for profits, etc., which is great because it brings the realised profits forward from pulling them out of the build to getting them straight on the land.
It's great. Now, there's very minimal costs and very minimal time in this transaction because you've actually sold it before you've settled. So there is no risk in that transaction. You know, we'll get to the Russell's question in a minute, which is, how did you get the buyer, and there's endless questions. The second property, again, you're going for a similar thing or a builder construction arrangement. Now, just on the first one though, that has now exchanged contracts?
Yeah, we have an exchange contract subject to a specific type of funding, which has actually been approved today as well, which is just a good coincidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it had 21 days or something.
That's right.
Clause in there.
For the 21 days for the buyer's satisfaction of a building plan, we've come up with a square metre rate and a draft plan for the builder. But because we wanted to push the sale quickly, we've given them a set rate for set square metres and a finish, and we requested that they sign the land up before we go any further. Once the land deal was done, we would stick to the square metre for the price, but we can change the plan. So the buyer we now have to work with, they have 21 days to be satisfied with the plan before the contract comes unconditional.
Okay. Is that on the land or that's just on the building?
No, the condition is on the land,
okay,
and the build will be an unconditional contract.
Okay, and then the purchaser enters into the contract with the builder directly,
yes.
So there is no risk from your side.
That's right.
Or the joint venture partner or anyone else. It's really a direct contract with them. Okay, and the second one is pre-sold, is out in the marketplace. And I think you had a couple of different ones, and some go ahead, some don't, and stuff. And now you've got another one on the purchaser to purchase that. And how's that going?
Yeah, well, that sale was tentatively done yesterday. It was confirmed this morning, and they'll be signing a contract on Tuesday.
Wow.
And we did this sale through the original plan, which was an investment package.
Okay, so it's a turnkey house and land package.
Yes.
They settle the land though, which gets the investor out of the transaction and you out of the transaction. Then they've entered into a building contract, and the building contract, they build the building, again in a similar way, but there's a profit within the building as well.
That's right.
And the total profit, just a rough number on that in gross terms, before we get down to, there's some GST and other costs, what's the profit on that one?
Gross profit, we have to be up near $70,000.
Okay, on that specific one. And there's about 70, I think, on the other one as well? Or
A little bit more on the other one.
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what, 80?
I'd worked out to about 155,000 if we had to hold the blocks for 12 months with rates and taxes. So it's probably a little bit more. Yeah, it's probably up towards 160, 170 out of the two before costs.
Okay. So, let's assume this person goes ahead, the second person as well as the first. And you still haven't settled the land yet. Doesn't settle for another 3 weeks or something. And just so the listeners understand is how much money have you actually put into this transaction yourself at this point?
Nothing.
So I don't know what sort of return 140, 150, 160,000 is on nothing, but I would say it's an infinite return. So if we just do $1, just for the sake of this discussion, because there's probably been or $5 because there's probably been a cup of coffee with me or something. It's probably 160,000% return. Right?
That's right, yeah.
What I think is important here is that some people work a year for that. It's a pretty solid income. Some people work 2 years if they're on an $80,000 income, and some people work technically 4 years. The average, $40,000 person.
Yes.
Now, without exaggerating, how much time have you spent on that transaction to get that together? Now, I know there's 8 years of your time of knowledge and everything else, but I'm talking, if you put it all together, because it could take...
Every minute driving, talking on the phone,
yeah,
anything at all to it.
Yeah.
Look, it couldn't be a week. It'd probably be 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days, okay. But that would be spread, let's say, over, 3 or 4 months or something?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's make it a week, all right? Okay, so that's a fairly good return for your time.
Sure.
And you're sitting here very calmly, and those watching the video of this, I also see how calm it is. And there'd be some people going, yes, and I know you used to do things like that 8 years ago, and you still probably get a little bit excited, but obviously I've actually not seen you jumping up and down, but it's a lovely feeling, isn't it? It's a confident feeling.
It's good, but I guess you desensitise a little bit after you do it many times. I actually had a better weekend on the weekend than what this week.
Because that was something new, something different, to sell 4 properties on it.
Well, the return I made out of it was actually higher again. So
Was it? Okay.
to have a week where I make north of $100,000 is not abnormal. I'd do it every month,
Okay,
or at least 50,000. There'd be a week every month.
right, that's cool. So, if you do a math on 50,000, even forget the 100, on a weekly basis, it's a reasonable income.
It sure is.
Yeah, you could make ends meet with that.
Yeah, I do well the other weeks too. So
That's good.
So at least one good week a month.
So it's not a dog's life, and your dog would be very happy that it won you, because they must get the odd tidbit of good looking after, and also gets this exercise that you're doing. Now, one of the questions that Russell had was how many of these transactions, and obviously not looking for any exaggeration, and we work on a 10-month year. How many of these transactions would you envisage? What did you say this last 12 months?
As single real estate transactions in the last 12 months, it would be north of 130 now.
Okay.
I only know that because we were adding up all our sales this morning in our meeting
Okay.
of this year so far. A lot of these are bulk deals where we'll go into an estate, say, and take 10 lots.
Yeah.
But there's probably been, say, 15 different projects.
Yes.
But yeah, adding up to over 130 transactions.
Wow. And it's great information and all that, great learning and different ones. And some were profitable, some maybe not so profitable. What would your take on that be?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And you've been doing this 8, 9 years or something. Have you done one ever that didn't work?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. And
Of course.
what did you learn?
A few things. The main thing I learned is that there needs to be multiple strategies around anything, rather than just the one that you not hope is going to work, but you almost close your eyes to anything other than that happening.
Yeah.
So it's good to have multiple options around anything.
And obviously nothing too serious to take you down in any way, but when you're doing that many strategies and that many projects and that many things, and in all of the changes that have gone on too, because you've gone through some very interesting years, there's been people who've gone bust and stuff like that.
Yeah.
One of my experiences with Cade, watching him, he's very, what I'd call risk averse in everything he does. And if I could share this too, that I've met some of the people he works with, and he's got some great relationships. Brokers, lenders, different people, and you know, he builds relationships, there's no doubt about that, and you've been with them for many years, and they talk very highly of you, so that's really in your favour, and I think it's one of your secrets. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. I only want the best people around me, and I've got no problems replacing anyone if it's not melding into the team correctly, which over time we've done. But yeah, the team we have at the moment, you know, which is very vast, and you're included in that, is a really strong and professional team.
That's good. And why is it that I'm in your team, Cade? Because you're a fairly independent person anyway, and you're very capable. Why am I in your team?
Well, it's probably easy that I answer that with exactly what I said to you when I first came down and spoke to you about it. You have access to some very following clients that I don't have, which is a really strong advantage. You know, it's hard to find somebody for business who trust people. Who trust the person that they're with so strongly.
Yeah.
It's great. And there's a couple of things I want to do. I want to learn. I wanted to learn your wisdom and your experience, I think were the words I used, didn't I?
Yeah.
Which wasn't a nice way of saying you're older than me or anything. I just know of a lot of your transactions in the past that we've spoken about over coffees and things, and there was a lot of very clever ways that you've gone around doing things that I had no idea of and I've never heard of before. So I thought, wow, I thought I knew everything, and here's this Roy McDonald, and I need to learn all of this. So that was the main reason. And yeah, secondly, as I said, there was a vested interest in me coming and requesting that you join my team, and that was, I need your help and assistance with money.
It's great, and it's been a real pleasure so far, and you know, we're very excited. And of course, Ty's learned a lot from you as well, and he's just hanging on a lot of your words and things, and you've introduced him to some of the marketeers and people, and just the whole thing has been really, really...
He's on a very steep learning curve. He's handling it well.
He is. Now he's got 2 licenses, one for New South Wales, one for Queensland. That in itself is amazing. All right, so Russell, you've been listening in, and as always, very patient here. Couple of quick things, Russell, as you know, and for those that don't know, Russell is one of the rare people on this call who hasn't actually done our Life Magic program, and therefore some of the things that he's going to ask or has asked are covered in that program. And I will deal with some of those as well, but they will be repeats, and sometimes we've got to hear the same thing, 7 times anyway, so it's not a waste in any way. So Russell, any questions for Cade right now? Otherwise I'll get into your questions.
No, I'm sorry, no other questions have come up other than the ones that I've already emailed through to you, Roy.
Okay, cool. Well, the first one, and this is a general question to Cade, it's about return. Joint venture partners is something I've done with Cade. I've just given him what we normally do with our joint venture people. And these are people with superannuation funds, these are people with redraw facilities, these are anyone with money, and we sometimes put some together, but as a rule, 107,000 is not a huge sum for a superannuation person, because we've got clients with $1 million and more. We've also got people that's what they have. So what our recommendation, and this is something I recommend for anyone really in your dream team members, if you have money partners, is the 10% return. That we think that's a good and reasonable return. And I said to Cade when I suggested this, if you're borrowing money at 6% or 7%, by the time you do the legals and the valuation fees and the charges for this and that and the other, there's not a lot of change at a 7%, at a 10%. It's just that this goes directly to the client, which is far better than going to the lawyers and going to the bank and fees and mortgage duty and a range of things.
They get enough.
Yeah, and that 10% is a strong yield. So first thing I say to any joint venture partner is, and you know, Russell asked the question, you know, working through this, if I invested 100,000, is there a minimum of $10,000 return on the transaction, regardless of profit, and 20% of the profit? If the profit, say, is on 100,000, then would I get 20,000, and therefore would I return 30%, being the 10,000 on the 10% and the 20,000 on the 20%, making a total of 30%. Can you confirm this is accurate? Now, the first thing I would say to Russell is that when we do a joint venture with anyone, we say profit or loss, so there is no guarantee. And this is one thing that joint venture partners have really got to know. If you're a money partner, you're in a transaction like this, there's never a guarantee. If you want a guarantee, leave your money in the bank, and as long as it's not the Cyprus Bank, it may even be safe. But if it's a bank that's not strong, then it may not be safe. However, if you're going to be a partner in business, and this is a business transaction, there's risks involved, and so in our transaction we say profit or loss. But what we do is we make the first part of the profit 10%, and therefore, assuming there is a profit, then they get the 10%. Then, after that 10% is taken out, then there's a 20% of the profit. If you took this transaction, there was $160,000 as a total gross profit. And let's say there was, just for the sake of it, we'll say $10,000 worth of, because if it lasted a year, well, it didn't last a year, it lasted for a few months, yeah, really. In fact, it might only last no time. Yeah. So the 10% becomes pretty minimal. In fact, what we normally do is we would put the money in the bank account, and it might earn only 3 or 4% while it's waiting to be drawn, and then it earns its 10% the minute it's drawn out of the bank. So it's kind of working, but not working very hard. But let's say the transaction took a year, then that is $10,000, and that would come off the 160, yeah, which in itself would bring it down to 150, and 20% of that's 30,000. So the end result is a person would actually end up with 30 plus 10 would end up, if they did both transactions, would end up with, no, sorry, you only get half of that, wouldn't you? So 75. You get $15,000 of the 150, because that is 2 transactions. It would take 214,000 as well. So let's cut it down. Sorry to confuse everyone. So 107,000 in that transaction, roughly 10,000 in the 10% on the 100. The 150 in gross profit for both would end up at 75,000, or after the 10% out would end up as 70,000.
65, sorry.
70,000. And then 20% of 70,000 would be 14. So there's 14,000 plus 10, 24,000. That's how that works. Now, what happens, Russell, if the transaction takes longer, then the 10% stays strong, but the profit share is getting less because the income starts to get eaten up. The profit share starts getting eaten up by the cost of money. And that's just a matter of mathematics. If the transaction's shorter, then which is usually favourable, so the transaction can be done again, then it's better for all parties. For instance, if you could do a transaction like this every quarter, you do 4 in a year, so your 100,000 plus would turn over 4 times. So the first year it would be roughly 125,000. Then the next quarter, 125 invested. Let's just make it 25,000 profit and income to end up with make that 150. Then 150 would become 175, and 175 become 200. So the yield is very, very high, annualised. These are extraordinary numbers, and we would normally promote that idea. Does that make sense, Russ? Yeah. So if that answers that question, but always understand the issue of losses as well. And I think we talked a bit about the option. and net equity, and I think we've covered that, I think, in almost the general discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question you've got, learning the process. Do you have a process documented so we can see the flow of the whole transaction, or is it something we learn as we shadow the process as a money partner? Well, as mentioned on previous calls, there's not much to it in comparison to other transactions. Well, in Life Magic, you're going to spend 2 hours with us, Russ, and we're going to go through a step-by-step process of 47 steps in our manual, and actually in our advanced programs 83 steps on how to do a transaction. And the first thing we do, and it's for everyone else listening in, we do is firstly work out the target. What is the target property transaction? What is the target price? And what is the target profit? And the target area. For instance, in your area, you would say within 5k of where I live, and I want to do a property, say $500,000, $600,000, and I want to make $25,000, $50,000, and I'm going to do a quick little makeover flick transaction. So I'm going to buy it, I'm going to take an option on it, I'm going to take control of it, I'm going to do it up, and I'm going to put it back on the market really quickly. In fact, if I can do it before I even settle, that would be good. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but there's a step-by-step process of everything you do in Life Magic. So you're going to love this program. So you're about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks away. So I hope you can hang on to then. And then the third question says, what to build on the land, question mark. How does one know what to plan to build? I imagine there's market knowledge, competitive research, and how do you know the features to include in the development? Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, Kate?
Sure. Well, the easiest way to answer that question is everything's done backwards. Roy was just using the word target, and that's a very good word. We acquire land and create products specifically for a target market. And for instance, in this Tweed deal, the target market was an investment package. I was able to realise that opportunity immediately through my experience in the industry, knowing that for the price I'm going to be able to buy the land, build a property for, and be able to sell it. I knew that the rental yield is going to be quite high, and an easy example of that is $1 a thousand is the general rule of thumb. So if you pay $400,000 for a property, an investor generally expects to get a return of about $1 per every $1,000 of the price in rent. So rent should be $400 if the price is $400,000. I knew I could move a package on that block of land sub $400,000, and I also know the rental market quite well, and I knew that the property would rent for well north of $400 per week. So that's a great example there, showing that I was instantly able to understand the buyer and know that they're going to see this as a good property because of its rental yield. So once I worked out the numbers, then I had to work out roughly how much I had to spend on a build. There was 2 people I needed to consider for the construction. It was first of all the buyer, and when I say the buyer, it's also the renter, because the better the house is for a tenant, the better the house is for the buyer. So I'm not actually designing a house that the buyer likes, so colours and all those sort of things can come out of it. I'm designing a house that's going to be a very rentable property to the local rental market. Generally size, the number of bedrooms, the very simple fundamentals of a property, because it is a product. It's the emotional things that aren't too much of concern. So with the budget I had for the property, I was able to design a plan. Considering that I know the tenants in Queensland like air conditioning because it's hot, I wanted to make sure I had 2 air conditioners, one in the master bedroom and one in the living room. People like stone benches these days. It's a very big plus. So I put in stone benches. Security screens, not that there's any issues, but tenants like a sense of security. People like a sense of security in their home to begin with, but a strong sense of security when you have a family, etc., will open you up to a broader market. So I installed security screens into the finish. Hardware and floors in the living rooms is great because your typical tenant is usually well, I shouldn't say usually, it's often a young family, and they're conscious of carpets, and people are busy. They're working hard to pay their rent.
Cleaning
and clean it quickly. Yep. An outdoor living area is very important, especially in Queensland. People like to sit, eat, and relax outside. So it's important to get a patio area in, etc., etc. I mean, there's other exit strategies for properties. They're not all designed around an investor, but if you know your target market who's going to pay the premium price for what it is that you're trying to sell, you can then work out the house to suit that buyer best. And that's actually quite a simple process. It's just understanding the buyer and the end use of the property.
Fantastic. So you look at the market, you look at the target. You don't try and change the market or change it. You just build to suit. And you're trying to put that product in there, in this case, just under that 400,000 to make it attractive. And you're not even worried about the noise factor, because that's one of its, if you like, opportunities in disguise. Because the buyer typically is an investor who often don't even go and look at these properties. They just buy them through
Look, the investor's told about the noise, but it's not a concern. I think when I first did this video, I answered this question explaining that for a person to buy this property and want to live in the home, no one's usually too concerned about the noise. I mean, I used to live on Victoria Road in Sydney, and for anyone who knows what that road is, it's about 8 lanes wide and a hell of a lot more noisy than that could ever be.
And if you live near a train and sleep near a train, in the end you don't hear the train.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
you become,
you just get used to it.
Desensitised to it.
Correct.
But in regards to that, it's the family owner who's going to build a home to live in it, and then with the dream of selling it for a substantial profit one day because it's the most beautiful home in a street, something along those lines. They see the noise issue as an issue that's going to cause them to not be able to sell the home for a premium price, and they're absolutely right. So to an investor who's probably going to want to sell this to another investor or first homeowner, the noise issue isn't a great issue.
Because it is reflected in the price. I mean, if you were in an upper market one, you'd pay another $100,000 for the same house.
Exactly right. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. So it's reflected in the price from the initial sale, and then of course the on-sales. But for someone who wants to buy the block of land and build a home on it, they knew that they wouldn't be able to get a great price for it. So one day when they want to sell it as a beautiful home for somebody to, I guess, be a dream home.
Sure. When you think about it, I mean, it's what we did in Ballina. There are just endless blocks of land that come up in subdivisions. It's finding the holes or the opportunities within those blocks of land. What we did with those ones, of course, they were dual occupancy blocks, and we bought them for a lot less money because of the dual occupancy issue. Okay, so the next quick question Russell has is, you got the land identification process, and starting out in a new city, how many calls would Cade need to make to a land sales agent / government department, etc., to source a suitable plot of land? In other words, from the standing start, how much time commitment is required to source the land of this type of transaction? I realise the longer I've been doing this, the easier it would be for the contacts, etc. Also realise the feasibility is required before and after the land is identified, but please treat this as a separate process time period when answering.
Yeah, that's not a very straight question to be able to answer for me. Once again, it depends on the market you're targeting. So if you're looking for an investment package block of land such as this one, it should be one phone call. Usually it's priced on the market at a price you could nearly buy it for full price quickly and be able to make a profit. For instance, when I'm out there looking for land, I actually don't make many calls at all. I nearly buy everything I attempt to buy. I pinpoint something specific. It's already usually advertised cheap, which there's a reason for that. Is quite often property will go on the market, people will hang around for a price, and it takes time for them to realise that the issues with their property is affecting it to a point where they're not going to get their price. And I don't want to muck around with those people who are already priced high, because all I'm going to do is come in and be a hell of a lot lower than what their expectations are, and I'll probably educate that person for the next buyer, and then the next buyer who comes along and makes an offer will make my lower offer will make his offer look better. So I just help that person sell their property. I prefer to deal with the people who have felt the pain, had a long time on the market, etc. But if you're looking for a renovation property that you want to improve its value, there could be a lot more calls and work involved in that, but proportionally there could be some good profits.
So just on that, as you know, you've been to Life Magic with us, and not that you didn't know what you were learning there, although there were some things you may have said that were different ways. Russ, what we do, we work on 100 feasibilities. And I've never seen a client do 100 feasibilities and put in offers that hasn't done a transaction. I've seen people do 10 feasibilities or 27 or whatever and then stop. I never met one yet that's done 100 with offers. In fact, I actually haven't met one that's gone past 54. Now, I always say 100 though, because I did have a client do 54. It was 53 and 54th one he did, and he did 3 in a row after that, once he got, because it was just how he was doing his offers. I have seen a lot of people do a lot of feasibilities and not put an offer in, and they're wondering why they didn't get a transaction. And of course, no offer, no transaction. And I think there's a question later on that goes on, how do you do it and timing wise. And I think my understanding, if you want to do a transaction in a year, 2 feasibilities a week based on a 50-week year would give you a transaction within a year. Yes. That's a pretty slow technique, but just to... I have 5 agents that I work with, and they give us transactions regularly, so it's a question of how many agents, and how many agents are there? There's like 12,000 of them. So it's getting that relationship. Now you've got some relationship with some pretty good agents. You just ring them, you ask favours, need this one sold, please do this for me, blah blah blah. Yeah, you've been doing that a long time, haven't you? And you call on those things.
Absolutely.
Yep, and they call on you.
Of course. Yeah.
I've got this client. Okay, we've got to sell this. Da 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 da. If you got something, I'll find you something.
Yeah, the word strategic alliance and joint venture. It's they need me and I need them.
Sure, everyone works together.
Of course.
But of course, you've got massive overheads in this business. You've got a mobile phone and a dog to feed.
Yeah, of course.
Mind you, do have a big office, but I had a look at this, and Kay did, of course, he's a deal maker, did the deal of a century, fully fitted out, all that. Some guy left or something and he picked up for a song.
Yeah, we took his furniture too.
Well, it's just being at the right time, at the right spot, and do it. So I'm going to come to a question in a minute about what drives you with all this, and what's important to you in life, but let's keep going. How do you approach financial planners to sell your properties, and what's the most effective method for doing this, and how do you position them, and what do you say?
Alright, well, financial planners, they're an exit strategy only for investment property. They're not an exit strategy for renovating a house or selling a residential property that you have a target market of somebody's going to move into this house and love it. It's not an easy thing to do. They want to deal with companies. They don't generally want to deal with individuals, and there's reasons for that. They want to be able to ensure that when their client is being presented a property, that they can research the company and they can see that the company is a respected company that has experience and knows what it's doing, a good reputation and brand. There's reasons for that. It gives people peace of mind that the builder is a sound builder financially and knows what they're doing. They're going to do the work. They're going to do the work fast and they're going to do it properly. There's many factors that go into trying to persuade a financial group to want to sell your property. But it's not generally a market that's opened up to a private individual. It's generally a corporate and commercial sort of industry where a company would like to deal with a company. An individual, of course, you can break into this market through creating a brand, etc. Because your brand and your company can look as big and as powerful and as professional as you want it to. But still, you've got to create a brand and reason why the investors are going to want to buy your developer's stock, because you're not just selling the product only. You're selling the service, the professionalism, the experience. There's so many factors that goes into the sale. Yeah,
and those relationships you've had for quite some time. But for the people who are just starting out here, to make it simple for them,
sure.
An ordinary agent is capable of selling and can be encouraged, in terms of commissions and things like that to make the sales.
And get the right one, they'll do a really good job.
Yeah, and all you want is someone who, you make it easy to make the sale. And on my experience is sometimes you've got to educate the agent because they're not very well educated. They're usually taxi drivers, who drive people around, show the properties. But they're like in that top quartile of every industry. There's some very, very good people, and you were one of those because you worked as a real estate agent at one stage.
I did.
And then you were trained up and you became one of the higher performers. So you've been there, you've got those rungs on the board. And then you've moved from agent to developer to entrepreneur, that's where you are now, which is great little growth that's happened for you. So Russell, we're talking away here. Is it all making sense? Because we've got any question for you at this point? Just working through them.
That's all making sense, Rob.
Good.
Can I add something very quickly, Roy?
Yeah.
You don't need to have direct access to these financial planning groups and financial groups to sell the property. You can go through a project marketing agency. They are hard to find, and they again are hard to persuade to sell their stock. But for instance, that's a business that I own, and developing. There's an old rule of thumb. It's an old rule that's spoken about in developing, and it's not developing that's hard. It's raising the capital or being able to exit the stock, and that's where the real skill and key ability of a developer comes into it. So before I was a developer, I was creating an exit strategy for developers. So once I had that exit strategy in place, I realised that I don't need to sell other people's stock. I can now
Sell your own.
But there are companies out there who will sell investment product. They don't generally sit on the corner like your typical real estate agencies, etc. But you can find them.
Great. There's a question that's come through on the line here. It's from Denise, and she says, how do you work around the live-in owner when putting an option on a property and want to do a makeover and putting it back on the market? I'm happy to answer that.
We can answer that.
Denise, what that's really about is it's difficult. However, I've had cases where we've knocked down the house that the live-in owner lived in, and I've had joint ventures with people. We've done this, and Harry's done stacks of them, where we'll put the owner into a flat or a motel or something while we actually destroy the house and subdivide it. These are the cases, Kate, where in some of the areas where you had the old block of land, the big house, they love the area, they've got old. They don't really want to say goodbye to all their neighbours and friends. We do a joint venture. The joint ventures will take that terrible old house that you've got, will build you a nice brand new one with a small garden, all new, and you can pick it out and do the design, and we're going to put another one equal size at the back, and if you want the back one you can, have the choice, and we'll do that for the block of land at the back.
That's right. And if they don't want to move, well, it's just like the old estates where you still see the little old farmhouse on the top of the hill surrounded by brand new little rented houses.
Correct. And we've actually, moved into a motel, or a flat, or, actually paid for the rent. That was part of the deal. In transactions, though, normally what you're looking for is that the owner, if we're going to do a renovation, in fact, you can do a lot of renovations, on the outside, of course, with an owner inside. And if we're doing a makeover, there's a TV show that does the makeover on the weekend. They leave and come back and the whole house has been done. Now, it doesn't have to be quite as berserk as that, but the makeover we're talking about is a coat of paint and maybe some carpet, but most of the work's on the outside. So I hope that gives you some idea, Denise. What I'd like you to work out mostly, guys, is ask questions of how do I make this work, not how not to have it work. That's just a bit of a guide. All right, now, there's a great question here that Russell asked here. It says, to get started, is it better to select a few newer houses in the type of land suburb that are developed and concentrate finding a deal in that area that looks, inverted commas, cheap, through other methods? What type of methods are available? Trawling realestatedomain.com, reviewing government websites, calling people directly and asking, visit in person to developing suburbs and talking to sales agents. So all that's true, isn't it? Anything else that you see?
No, that is true, but I would suggest trying to stick to the more obvious ones of, such as I said before, people who are already on the market, and you can people are clever. You can instantly see there's some kind of pressure, stress, or issue, and they need to move.
Correct. The property's under stress, and they've been on the market for 6 months, 9 months, a year, sometimes 18 months, 2 years, all that sort of stuff. Or a developer owns it, can't get it through. We just had one the other day where that happened, and he's obviously run out of money, or something's happened to him, so he's trying to get rid of this land. And the bank will be onto him, and it's a perfect opportunity. I personally think that this is all relationship based. Developing relationships with 5 agents is usually ample to keep someone earning 100,000 plus a year. 200,000, 300,000, not an issue. If you develop those relationships, because they've got property, and just like Cade, you think, well, gee, why does Cade do this? He's got so much money, he's making so much money. There's so many transactions. So in the end, you can't do them all. Like an agent, the best agent in the world's got to, he can't buy everything, even if he sees the best buy in the world, because he must run the money, or have too many transactions in the pool.
That's right.
So the best hairdresser can't cut their own hair. They need someone else. So they're out there, but it is about relationships, about you. When I say you, I'm talking about who's on the phone call here, and anyone listening to this, you getting out of the way and making this work. And I just want to go to the last question, because I think we've answered all the others. And this is really a question for you. He says, what are the 5 major traps for new planners in this style of real estate transaction, and what do you learn the hard way, or what advice would you give people attempting to do this? Great question, isn't it?
Yeah, there is, and there'd be 2 categories here. I mean, the biggest trap, and it's in anything really, but especially in something like property, is don't get caught up in hopeful thinking. And as soon as you believe a real estate agent, what they tell you about you're going to sell the property for after you do this project too much, etc. You'll get caught into hopeful thinking, and that's where you'll find a problem. The easiest way to do this is to want to sell a property for a specific price. So you put that into your feasibility, and instead of looking at all the evidence on the market, you go out there and find the evidence that supports your thinking, and you go, yep, I'm right. So you insert this evidence into your your risk management research. Feasibility, yeah. And you go, okay, great, I'm going to do this project because I found the evidence that I can sell it for this. Yeah. But quite often you miss lots of other pieces of evidence which would say otherwise. And I actually didn't learn this through experience from real estate, through property. It's property development, although I have had some examples of it that have caused me some minor issues in it, but they haven't caused me any major ones. I actually learnt this when I was a real estate agent, and that's the best place in the world I could get this example. Every owner would bring their properties to a real estate agent and want too much for it.
Yeah.
And they'd tell you why their property is better than the one that's sold down the road, or why their property is worth this. And that's a really good example of how people get caught up in hopeful thinking. Yeah. So they say, look, mine's better than that house down the road because of this, so mine must be worth more. But they don't go out there and look for reasons why their property isn't as good as that one.
Of course.
And quite often when you hear a story about a person who sells their property and they're usually blaming the agent.
Oh, always.
Well, that's just exactly, always. And when they're blaming the agent, it's usually not because the agent has lied to them or given them reason to even blame them. It's usually because they got caught up in hopeful thinking. They ended up selling their property for a lower price than what they wanted for it, purely because their eyes were closed to negative and bad evidence in the market.
Reality.
Yeah. So that's the biggest trap, and that you can relate to anything in life. It's sit back and be careful.
So just going on that, and just again my experience with Cade, what I've noticed on his feasibilities, he's always got conservative numbers, and you've said to me on the ones I've looked at, look, we may get some more on this, but this is I'm absolutely sure we'll get this. And in the cases I've watched you do it, you've actually got that or better. So, and in fact, you've put even in time. So it might take us 90 days, might take us 6 months. But we'll definitely have it under a year. And lo and behold, you've done it before we even settled. So, but you've got your feasibilities with those numbers in it. So you've taken the conservative view, both in time and money, So there's your worst case scenario you're looking at. I mean, there can be a tsunami or something,
Yeah.
but you've taken as conservative, let's say, as you can.
Conservative is not also always the right word. Sometimes it's pessimistic on the outcome. So conservative can be seen as, okay, I'm going for the bottom end of a figure, for instance, but I think pessimistic would be something more along the lines of, I might be very unlucky with my sales process here and get 3 buyers who unfortunately have CRA issues or whatever it be and can't proceed with the sale, so it's going to take me 4 sales, which I would then estimate out to 12 months. So when I do a feasibility, I work it out to a bad run of situations which I can predict and what my outcome would be if I got the unlucky run. So I don't think I'd be conservative with things too much. Yes, I am conservative, but not too much. I'm just looking at all the things that could go wrong and factoring them into the deal. Work out that I can make a substantial profit at that point, so that there's even better profits if we do it quickly. And you mentioned to me before if you had any problems, and of course I've made some mistakes over my time. But the good thing about property, and if you do your research properly, is your profit is usually a very good safety net, and it doesn't usually realise to a loss in the end. And I mean, that's why I'm still here, because even when I've made my mistakes, it's usually the profit I'm using. It's not usually my own
capital.
Money. Yeah.
So, because if you take that land in this example, you know, your worst case is, could you sell the land not for 180, but could you sell for 120 or something like that?
Exactly.
So, you know, you buy it for 95, so you've already got a profit, or certainly protecting your cash back. Because I think, you know, if I really knew this was on the market for that kind of money, there'd be a bit of a run on trying to get it. Which, you know, people will then ask the next question, well, you know, how did you do that? So it just never ends. The questions are always endless. And we're coming back to these ones, so tips. So that's a big tip. Conservatism, pessimistic, covering yourself, whatever.
Yeah, just be open for any kind of information that you can get through any of your Century items. Usually your gut feeling will be the main one.
Okay.
And of course your eyes on research.
All right. So what's the what would be another tip? What would you say for a new player?
It's another tip for a new player. Let me think back to when I was starting out and try to jog my memory.
Well, while you were thinking, I'm going to give you a couple. Firstly, and we've already said all of these things, Ross, and listen for those listening in. The big tip I'll give you about Cade is he's not a lone wolf, he's a team player.
Yeah, that's a
and that's his leverage, that's where he gets his leverage. And he's a hare, as you probably know. He's a bit of a hairy owl, he's a bit of a thinker. And he brings in, you know, tortoises and squirrels and everyone else into his game. So he's got some really good people around him that he's developed. So that's a big tip. And then we've also talked about that relationship building that you do with that and how you do that. If I could also, again, just as an observer, the thing I really admire about Cade is the man of his word. If he says he's going to do something, he does it. If he says I'm going to pay this, I'll pay that. If he's going to do this, he's going to sell it, whatever he's going to do. Everything in his power he will do to be a man of his word. He says, I'll bring you back, I'll do it, he does.
Also expect in return that.
Yeah, I think what you give is what you get back. So it's good, and that builds safety, it builds trust, it builds all sorts of things. I can think of a few more, but go ahead.
Yeah, the traps don't always need to be negative, but I mean, everybody knows how many property developers have gone broke these days, and I'm talking high flyer, very professional wizards of the game. Yeah. And most of them are gone. Yeah. And you can relate that right down to a beginner or to a very, very small property investor, and that is, don't ever go into a deal that if you get it wrong, that it'll
knock you out. Yeah.
Because that lesson there in regards to security and risk is a very wise old tale from right back in the Babylonian days that you need to consider when you're doing any kind of transaction. So I mean, that really is the most important one, even though I think the first trap I spoke about is the biggest and easiest to make mistake. Don't ever do something that'll put you out.
Donald Trump has a great word for us. Is if you did this transaction, you lost, would it wipe you out? You know, and if the answer is yes, don't do the transaction, no matter how much profit.
Exactly.
And that's what the greed gets people. They go for the big one and let the. And of course, the old story to me, you know, all the eggs in one basket and all that. we like to see people do something in the order of 20% of their money in a transaction at risk, and even take a small proportion of the transaction rather than go for broke. And the word is go for broke, because that's what they're doing. They're going towards broke.
Well, you're great at that, Roy, and in observation back, I think that's amazing the way that you're able to look at these things and consider other people in those kind of ways. But yeah, I mean that's a great standard, but that can change if the risk element of the deal is lower.
It's lower, yeah.
I mean, if you were to buy a block of land, say for this Tweed deal, and you only had $100,000, well, it's not a risky deal if you own the block with no debt on it, because there's nobody to take it off you. Your holding costs are just rates and water charges per annum.
True. And I know you don't mean to say this, it's not a risky deal. There is risk in everything. There's a risk whether someone would get home alive, let alone that this transaction would work. So there's risk in everything. However, the risk is extremely minimised, and I say this to clients: when you see a person going into a transaction with 158 home units on a 2-year off-the-plan build, there's a lot of risk in that. You put your money in and you hope and pray, and the market, who would have known the market would have turned the way it's turned? And some of those transactions go on for 3 years and 4 years. When you're doing with 1 or 2 people, and there it is, it's a much different equation. So, and I think control is an important issue with that too. That if you look at the worst case, you end up with a block of land, as we discussed. So, okay, Russell, we spent an hour with you here on the phone, and you had the magic man. So, is there any questions? Okay, perfect.
And I guess I'm really looking forward to live magic and shaking hands with Kane if he's going to be there. Are you going to be there, Kane?
The next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. And Russell, I'd just like to say, what a great attitude. It's something that I share myself with you. And the biggest thing that stops people doing anything in this world is the fear of overwhelm, or not necessarily the fear, but becoming overwhelmed. Anything you can do in life as you're learning can be very overwhelming, but some people don't stop and they go, okay, well, I'm going to work this out, and others don't. And you've got a really great attitude. And, people like you are the sort of people that become successful.
Yeah. Well, Russell's already a very successful presenter, a very successful IT person. In fact, he's got some of the highest companies in this country he works and works with.
Yeah, well,
Just
you can hear it in his voice.
You can.
Yeah.
And he's a real trailblazer in what he does. It's just that real estate wasn't his number one thing, but he's building his 5 income streams, and that's why that is. So he's being very modest in just. But I thought the questions he asked were brilliant questions, and even the people who completely done our program would have gained enormously by your answers and his questions. So Russell, we're in your debt. So thanks so much for the questions.
I look forward to shaking your hand too.
Good job.
Thank you. And by the way, if I fall off the call the next 15 minutes, it's because one of those multinational clients has been doing my head all day and I'm exhausted. So don't be surprised if I kind of fall asleep the next half an hour. I'm tired.
Cool. That's okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So Russell's just getting it set up. It's a bit like taking a girl out and getting all the value that you want and then falling asleep. So he spent got all his answers done. So well done.